Good evening. You're listening to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have Professor Pixel, and we are covering The Prisoner, Season 1, Episode 8, Dance of the Dead. And Pixel, I have to tell you, as we're going through weekly here on our TV spinoff show, Extreme TV, covering one of the greatest TV shows of all time, The Prisoner. Going through an order here, we've talked about a few things with The Prisoner that come to mind. Free will, person versus the state. There's a lot of themes that this show presents, and I think one of the interesting topics you brought up, being the young 20 something that you are, is that every episode's kind of the same with he tries to escape, but somehow they get him back. And it gets a bit redundant, which I think is the fancy word for saying the same damn thing keeps happening. One idea I brought up was that it seems like these episodes, and I know with hardcore prisoner fans that listen, understand that somehow the viewing order, if you flipped it around a little bit, the episodes might make more sense or build on each other. Because to me, for Dance of the Dead, what I would say for my initial thoughts on this episode is it's a solid episode in that it seems like it's a regular prisoner episode with what happens, but in a way it's completely different because it's very low key. There's hardly any action, and even though we see the rover and the black cat that we had saw before, which I loved. Number two is now a woman, and there's lots of attractive women in here, and there's a big festival going on, and really kind of nothing happens kind of at the end too. And it just the way some of the language that goes back and forth between everybody makes you feel like this should have been one of the earlier episodes, not halfway through the season. It stands out for being, like I say, extremely low key. Much more different than the episodes we've cut up through now. What's your initial take?
Um, well, you said there are a lot of attractive women in here. Number two isn't one of them.
Well, she's in her 50s, the actress at this time.
I know. I'm just saying she did a great job, especially for being the first woman to be number two from start to finish from where we're watching.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely enjoyed the low-key aspect of it, where it's all it's not calm, clearly, but there's just so much going on, yet it's so... Even the Rover scene, because there is a scene where he is running on the beach, and Rover is about to block his way, but he's taking it slow, and he stops. There's a dead body on the beach, and then his friend is trying to get in contact with him. It's a whole lot going on, and yet there's nothing bombastic about it. That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I say it's a little different. But so again, some of the language early on, they talk about things that make you feel like it should be an early episode. Like he's relatively new here, and he's still trying to get what's going on too. But they do talk about the setup of the village a little bit. The new number two does. So yeah, let's just dive right in. Obviously, like we said, we get with the voiceover that it's the number two that we're talking about is a woman, and later on she's dressed like Peter Pan, and there's a reason why. So this is the episode that's responsible for giving us the great overhead shot of not only the air bubble coming out of what looks like a toilet that turns into a rover, but also him running on the beach with that. It looks like a blue filter to me or whatever, but it's pretty interesting that if you notice with the wording of what they say in the early part, some of it's different. Like we want information, we want information. There's certain things that are only said a certain number of times versus the other number two's voiceovers in these introductions, which I think is neat. So we start off with what we've talked about before with mind control and drugs going on. This seems like, oh, here's another episode that's going to be involved. But again, the way they do this, you see where if this was done like in a second or third episode, if they showed it, it would make more sense to set everything up. You see people walking into his room late at night, and you see how he's being basically programmed and he doesn't know about it. And that's one of the few things as an observer of the show that we get to see that happens is we know he's being somehow mind controlled, at least programmed a little bit to try to have his defenses come down and give them the information that they're seeking. And it's interesting because the doctor in charge of this number 40, he's basically trying to push the envelope. He's, as it's said early in the show, extreme, and it's a big interesting thing between the dynamic him and number two have, the lady, about how far he can push him. But we do see somebody talking on the phone to him, which is supposedly an old friend. And he's obviously drugged out of his friggin' mind because a phone's held up for him. He can hardly talk. He's being told to say certain things. So they're subconsciously programming him. And number two basically makes it all stop. This is starting off in crisis mode already rather than something just happening and us, developing into a particular scene. And I like it. And again, that's where we're a little different because when he wakes up, you see him, with a female voiceover, good morning, life's worth living, drink your tea sort of thing. And he gets up and he gets around and the big excitement everywhere because these beautiful women are bringing him tea and everything around is that there's going to be this carnival at the end. And at first I thought, oh, the green haired looking one in the green dress who came in, very attractive young one. I thought, oh, they're going to do something with her. They kind of don't. So I'm going, normally they do not take beautiful women and make sexual attraction a factor in the show. It's alluded to a little bit in here, but not really. And when she leaves, it's interesting. You see a guy, the mail carrier, who's driving one of those giant penny farthing bikes, and he gets a special delivery, which is a request to attend the carnival and dance. And so what's interesting is, okay, we see some people standing watching a bunch of the villagers move around, and number two's already talking to him, basically saying, hey, you got an invitation, you need to dress up. And he's like, well, do I have a choice? She's like, if it's what you want, if it's what the majority wants, to talk about how it's a democracy and how she's a little fed up because, he always plays to win, which isn't exactly English of him. So there's some nice little, as we've said before, subtle back and forths going in too. And the big reveal here while they're talking outside and all this going around is that number two suggests number six take somebody, basically as a date. And apparently, and this is not something to me, and I'll ask your opinion on this when you go to talk about it here in a moment. We've seen different women or different people him talking to in these episodes, right? But apparently it's the person who's watching him is referred to as an observer that goes and basically narcs on him what he's doing. In this case, the woman he's thinking about maybe asking, and it's her number's 240 because again she doesn't have a name. She looks distraught, like she doesn't want to do it, and runs off. And of course that kindly starts him to get a little bit intrigued, but Rover even kind of pauses him and kind of follows him around. It's a very subdued Rover because we don't hear that scream that we're used to hearing with Rover. He just sort of pops up and follows around. And even when number six starts following around, the Rover blocks certain ways, and then there's like this force field that does not allow him to go into the area, which is supposed to be like laid off for him or whatever, which we'll talk more about later. And when he goes home after all this stuff, we kind of take it all in. There's his black cat just kind of sitting there at the front of his home. And of course, we know that number two is watching all that. And I'll pause there and let you catch up there. That's a big chunk of the early intro.
Yeah, no, that with all of this that's starting us off, there's, like we said, a lot that's going on, even though it's all fairly low key. Honestly, I felt that the scientist is quite feels like he's trying to undermine number two at any chance he can. Oh well,
I got that vibe too. He's an ugly guy, but not like ugly as in like you look at his face and you go, Jesus, ugly. He's just there was something about his face with an exaggerated jaw and everything else there too that just made me go, this guy's a creep. But yeah, undermining number two, we haven't seen that before, have we?
No, because number two has usually ultimate authority, even if he is a wimp and a coward. We never see actually someone plotting against them other than number six. So where we stand with this, honestly, it adds an interesting element. And the cat, I think I was watching with somebody else. They went ahead and said, whoever worked on this show clearly wasn't a dog person.
Cats are probably easier to work with, maybe. I don't really know. We've never really kind of got into that.
Yeah, no, not at all. And after that, after he makes the acquaintance of a black cat, he goes ahead and he is with number two again. And number two is I can't remember. Does she actually say you should get a girlfriend?
Basically, kind of, sort of, yeah. It's like they want him to be
Go get
happy,
go get some
and
action,
what he
man.
to do that,
Oh.
yeah.
But as he is being watched, he goes ahead and tries to start talking to the person on him currently, uh, who's listed as number 240. And that's when he learns of the carnival that's supposed to happen. And I have to go ahead and point out, is this like the fifth event, like major event? Oh, all the villages involved that we've had in the show.
Well, it is. It's a part of that old Roman kind of idea of bread and circuses. While Rome's falling and burning, you distract everybody by putting on these spectacles of display, and which at some point might seem to work and be effective by keeping people at bay. It's certainly a device that seems to work because it allows people to look forward to something. They get distracted, they burn off energy, and frankly, if they have good social interactions, they're more likely to not be so defiant. And it's another example of what you bringing this up of us talking about how this looks like it should have been an earlier episode, because even though he's going through all this when he gets home and he's talking to the green dress lady, the maid, if you were, because there's a lot of different ones, he's feeding the cat in there and he's, kind of pounding on her, being a dick for information about, hey, where do we get the milk for the cat and the ice cream? Is it during the midnights? He's thinking about trying to cover up the TV set that he thinks might be being spied on with a pillow, and he hears an electric static thing too. And I don't know. It's like I said, this is an episode that looks like it should be early on because people start putting flowers on his window, and he's like, "What's going on?" And the guy's like, "Oh, everybody gets flowers for the carnival." Different older lady comes in to give him his midnight tea, which we know from other episodes has kind of been drugged. But yeah, the next scene too is after he goes to bed, you see where number 40 and number two are talking, and yeah, he does seem like he's undermining, but basically she lets him know, hey, it's in charge. I won't let. She takes the power stroke here by basically saying, hey, you're a bit enthusiastic. Will everything kind of go on that because you're pushing things a little too far? So just back off a little bit. And they're talking about this guy named Dutton, about him being difficult, who's a reference for the person we saw drugged up in the wheelchair early on, talking to number 6 when he's asleep, but people are working on him. After the scene, we go, okay, they're plotting and scheming something here with this dude in number 6. So we don't know what that relationship is. Of course, there's going to be one. We see number 6 at night, checking his place out and all that too. And again, something that seems like we would see in an earlier episode. He goes, the cat's on his bed, which I thought this was a great little scene. He goes to like lay down and all that. I don't think he drinks the tea, and the cat's laying on her. So instead of that, he's like, you know what? I'm going to lay on this little reading sofa. And he's looking up at the light, which we know has been one they've programmed him with, basically any light they can do this with. And you hear number 2's voice, or I should at least say a female's voice, saying, sleep, sleep, sleep. And he's like, fuck this. I'm getting hell up and I'm going to leave at night. And so he just gets off. And again, sometimes when he's by himself trying to figure things out, the episodes speak to me a bit more than the existential talk and the battle between number 2 and who's number 1 and all this kind of stuff. And here at night, it's beautifully shot. We get a lot of different scenes of the village, and in this particular case, the beach. He goes out to the shore. He starts looking at it. We do know that number 2's watching him in on the giant observation monitor, and we see the rover on the beach, and he just basically gets fatigued, and she's like, well, he'll go back to his place. He's got nowhere else to go, and we can figure out what his limits are, sort of thing. So
I have to
interesting scene.
say, I have to say that I do love her delivery of that, where she's just watching and he says, "He's got nowhere to go. Just leave him there. It'll be fine." And then that's when he's able to find the dead body on the beach, washed ashore.
Yeah, this is kind of a creepy scene because we see a black cat in there and she's petting it while watching all this goes on. So maybe we're assuming obviously it's the same cat. But to me, what I wanted to point out about a female number 2 is all the number 2s we've seen before, the different ones and their different approaches to how they're trying to interrogate number 6. Some act like his buddies, some don't, but they all let him know basically they're in charge. They all seem kind of competent. One seemed a little bit scared, even though he's competent. He was always the milk drinker, and I hated him. But I always felt like, and I got a vibe that they were older dudes, maybe the same age or definitely 5 to 10 years minimum or older than a prisoner, so maybe 50s. To me, they had seemed like they had seen more and they understood the structure of the village. Here with the woman, she's obviously stern, but she seems like she enjoys the challenge of trying to break them a bit. And I like the idea of a woman's approach in trying to do that instead of going hardcore like some of the approaches we've seen. We're seeing her basically say, "Oh, let him like burn his energy out. We'll see how it goes. We're not going to confine him. We're going to let him just kind of do these things, and I want to make sure he stays safe. I don't want his brain damaged by the current number 40." That's always been a concern with the doctors trying to do a bit too much, and whoever the number 2 is having to reel in the man so they don't damage number 6 permanently. But I like the fact that immediately we find out she's wrong because he doesn't go back to his place. He basically crashes there in the middle of the night, wakes up, and this is just a wonderful scene. It's the picture for the stream that we have here tonight, where he wakes up on the beach shore and there's this body that's just laying there in the water. And I gotta say, this scene looks like it's filmed with no backdrops, no filters, no set pieces, because a lot of them are. And when you see him walking up to around the body and looking startled, you see how much his feet are sinking into the mud. So this looks like legit wherever they filmed this at, whether it's there at the actual hotel that they filmed this at in Port Marion or somewhere else as a stand-in. It's just a great scene, and it makes you feel like he's a million miles away from civilization, because when he turns the guy over, he does what any of us would do, especially if we're spy guys or we're paranoid or have half a brain. He's looking around, he's going through his stuff. He finds a little tiny transistor radio, which he pockets. And I'm like, this is cool. But again, it's so low key. Once he goes through all that, we're going, okay, how does this tie into what it is we're talking about? And again, we're getting close to about halfway through the episode. So again, it's gone slow. Not a lot of actions happen to it, but me, this is just kind of neat. But again, still feels like it should be earlier. You mentioned how you really liked the scene. What was your takeaway from it?
Yeah, no, just him actually interacting with the body. The body itself it has a feeling to it that's not quite typical for us, because as he's there and he finds that, it seems like something is to his advantage. And in there's a message, and he's able to warble it around, get it to come in clear. But later on, he has to cover, because number 2 and I suppose her assistant, who is, I believe, the one that wore the green dress earlier, they come upon him as he's fiddling around with it. And he has managed to switch it to something else where it's not the message that's talking about a mission that must be fulfilled. That's going ahead. It's really adding a layer to this episode. There's also a scene there on the beach where 6, after he goes ahead and deals with the corpse, trying to send it out to sea with a note, basically his message in a bottle, hiding behind him in a cave is a man. And this man is apparently an old friend, Roland Walter Dutton.
Correct. The guy we saw earlier.
Yes. And he is just he's kind of traumatized, because he has, I believe they said, like, just a little over 48 hours.
3 days, yeah, 72, I think it was.
72, there we go. And they're basically going to deal with him. They're going to bring him into the village permanently. He's not going to be himself any longer, like, let's say, number 6. And he is just terrified of what will happen. And at this point, the carnival is just around the corner, and here it comes. I'm going to go ahead and let you take over here as well.
Because
So
well, I picked on a few different things that came out during this whole exchange. So at the beach, when he's dealing with the body, we see him looking at like a little cave entrance or whatever, and I don't know if it's meant to be the same cave that we saw in the earlier episode where they were distilling alcohol. I don't think so, because I thought he had to go through a little bit of a wooded forest to get there, and this one's off the side of the beach, but it looks like the same set piece. Have not pulled them up side by side to compare them, but the idea is that that's going to come back into play a little bit later when he's his friend. Right after he deals with the corpse, and there's this official decree where people will go tonight to the place where they're going to be partying, which ends up being, the town center. Most everybody's kind of dressed up and ready for it. I mean, the guy's dressed up as an old school guy, and he's got this royal decree that all citizens have to take note. They're going to the carnival. There's going to be music, food, and happiness by order, which is that, kind of ironic sort of thing. You can't force people to have fun and all that too, but you see everybody kind of eager to do it already, and they're just kind of almost celebrating the fact that they get to have it. You see everybody kind of dressed up in dresses and some masks and stuff. It's not full on 100% Venetian, but it's
I
kind of
do
funny.
have to say that because everybody is dressing up and they have their costumes assigned for him, uh, number 6 is given an outfit.
Yep.
And what he's probably expecting something ridiculous. There's a maid in there. I don't remember her exact number, but
Call her Hot Maid.
there we go, hot maid. And he goes ahead and he's having a short conversation. Oh, keeping it light. He pulls it out, opens it, and it's a tuxedo. It's just a simple. He says
It's his own suit.
it,
That's the
he
funny
does say
part.
it's his own suit, but I guess he means from before because it's clearly different from what he's wearing right then, and that seems to be what he's supposed to be wearing. And whenever he goes, he sticks out. And I love the shots in the Capitol, the town center, whatever we want to call it. I love the shots of him just walking in. People would step aside. You get a large view. It's really quite interesting. We haven't had this kind of look at it before. But there is a part a little later on where he goes ahead and he's able to slip away from the party to investigate further into the town center. And that's when he finds out that that Dutton is to just be executed. And he's able to slip around, and it's very slow, low. And when we talk about James Bond, this is one of those things where he's able to go through. There's one scene, though, that sticks out. There's a key that's on a door, hanging right by a door to unlock it. It kind of defeats the purpose.
It does. To me, where things kind of change here going into the middle of the second act, going to the third is, when he's on the beach trying to tune in this radio, and number 2 comes out and they have a conversation about the observer and everything, and they're pretty open with each other about him saying that, hey, I'm a free guy, and you can try all this crap, it's not going to work. And she's like, well, only our very special children get an observer. And it's funny how she's taking almost this motherly type approach to him, because he's looking around, he's trying to figure out things, because he only has so much time before he has to go there. And we get to see the boat where people are working on it, and he grabs the boy and he takes the body of the corpse that washed up ashore, and we see him run out there. And apparently there's a few gaps in the surveillance systems, not 100%, because he does get to see it on shore, but perhaps this cave might be one. But we see him going near to the dead body, and we just go, oh, to your point, the message in the bottle is he's going to put like his picture, a note in there, and send him out to see where the tide takes him. And I thought that's cool, because obviously he knows something about building boats. We've seen that in an earlier episode about how he makes one. So seeming like he came through the Navy seems to be a legit idea. Not sure how much he was a co-pilot, or at least a second person in one of the episodes as well. So it could have been Royal Navy at the time. But the reason I'm mentioning is because not only is it a cool scene, it will definitely come into play. But you do see his observer, which I did notice this too, and I don't know if it's pertinent to other episodes or in the future, or if it's just this episode should have been shown earlier. But number 240, the blonde observer that looks like she doesn't want to be doing this stuff, her number badge, instead of the penny farthing bicycle on a white background like everybody's is. Hers is white on black instead of black on white. So I just happened to notice that because after he drags the body off and all that too, that's where he runs into his buddy, and it is kind of creepy because the guy honestly is delivering it like, yeah, if I don't give him everything I want, which I've already told them, they're going to kill me. He goes, so I really don't have anything left anymore or whatever. And he just says, hey, I didn't have any access to all the super vital information. So it's not really a warning, which is different. It's not really a plea for him like, well, you could save my life if you only could tell them where you'd whatever. He's basically just there as a figment to show him, yeah, at some point you do run out of possibilities and my time is up. So I think that's how they're looking at him, and giving him a name like Roland Walter Dutton sounds very formal. And this guy delivers it not like as an angry spy or whatever, but as a guy that, wants to go out gracefully or whatever.
Mhm.
And this, the whole scene here that you mentioned with number 6 talking to number 2 on the beach, just well shot with him walking across that and all that near dusk or whatever, and he's got the tuxedo on, because it really is a back and forth that we've talked about verbally. They get really good in here. And there was another great scene earlier where the beach is the backdrop, where he looks like he's on a cannon pillar or something on the outskirts of the town when the town's in the background, and it's beautiful. I wish there are more episodes like this that show us the village, because it's very small, but from different angles. But to me, the least interesting part of this entire whole show is this third act, because when he shows up to the town center, because he's able to be let in, everyone's dressed up, everyone's just standing around literally doing nothing, and it's just for everybody to kind of be like, yeah, we're here or whatever. And eventually she makes people start playing music that she's hired, and people
Fun
start doing
fact,
drinks and dancing. Go ahead.
there's a piece of music in here that trying to
Dark
get the note
Shadows,
up.
stock music.
Yes, it was originally used as as the sound for the music box
Yep.
for Josette. They changed that later on, but in the original episode, that is the one that was used. I thought it sounded familiar whenever I was listening, and so I had to look it up, and I did eventually find out. Hey, there it is.
And we've
uh,
tackled the idea of doing Dark Shadows at some point here, but it's such an extensive show. It's the logistics of it are tough. It's just, to your point, British shows would sometimes cannibalize things like that, and it's okay because the music really in this whole episode feels a little bit different. And the one thing I wanted to point out with the way everybody's dressed in the background, yeah, there's guys dressed up. There's a cowboy. There looks like there's a Parisian guy, but we see the observer that was watching him as she's trying to dance with him. She's showing a little bit of cleavage, which normally they don't do in this show or whatever. And she's pretty, she's attractive, but she's dressed as Little Bo Peep. And what did happened to Little Bo Peep? She lost her sheep, right? So then the reason why this is important is because it seems like mostly it's women we focus on. We see Isis, okay, as an Egyptian goddess. We see a guy who's just dancing in the background. He's got like a Mexican sombrero, even though he's not. But to your point, he does the spy thing where he walks around and kind of like just slips out for a moment. I'm like shocked that there's no security, but he dons glasses that he finds and a hat, and he puts it on, runs into somebody in a hallway. It's like, oh, I was just going to give number 2 the termination notice of her latest subject, which of course we know is the Dutton character. And he's like, well, I'll give it to her, and I understand it's emergency. And in doing so, we're like, all right, this is the spy shit. This is cool. He finds himself in what appears to be the intelligence room, where there's nothing but ceilings worth of to floor of just information everywhere, old catalogs of stuff like that. It looks like an old school library, a card index, if you will. It's remarkable how things have changed, but wow. And to your point, yes, he sees the conveniently placed key right next to the door, which he takes. And when he walks in this room that's empty, there's yet another room on the other side. And of course, very obviously there's a trap door in the middle of this floor, but he pulls a body out because it looks like it's where they do the dissecting, and number 2 walks in her Peter Pan outfit. Look, she's in her 50s. I've seen much worse looking women in her 50s. She's aged well for her. Not saying she's smoking hot, but the bottom line is she's got a very stern delivery, and she looks like Peter Pan. She's very petite, but almost has the like gymnast physique. So it's weird how what's supposed to be happening here occurs, because she basically says, "Oh yeah, by the way, that body you tried dumping off, we got a hold of it and we arranged it so it looks like you. So now when whoever may find it, they're going to officially think that you're dead." They just talk about amending him slightly and on that British code speak. And while this doesn't bother him, he still doesn't seem to even be bothered, or he's just amused at the fact that she's like, you know what? I have to be your defender here because you are now going to be prosecuted, and here's how it works. You got three people that are going to judge you for your indiscretions here. And he's like, oh, I don't get a jury. I don't get this. And all I'll say is America's system of law is based differently than the British, differently than the French. It really is a unique one of its kind. Um, and since we're trying to be apolitical when we do most of our discussions of things, it'll simply say that he seems amused in a cynical way because it looks like a Roman emperor who I called Caesar. There's obviously a Napoleon character there, and it looks like a person dressed as Queen Elizabeth, and he's being charged with having on, and he's reading what royal decree, the Roman guy, about having on his person and using unlawfully against the community an object which breaks our rules, which is a radio. So he sits there while they're going through it, and he's supposed to be defended, but they find him guilty, and the charge is death. I'm
Yeah.
like, what the hell's going on here? Because you've got the weird disco light thing going on, and I'm like, why is number two sticking up for him? I don't get this. Just seems like a play. It just didn't feel like anything to me, because they basically say, go get him to everybody there. And it's like, well, I don't know that they're all on drugs or they spiked the Kool-Aid or something, because they'll start chasing them down. And it's a really horrible chase scene. This is where I lost it on this episode and was not liking it. Let me pause here before we wrap up the end, because the end is almost here. What's your take on what's going on here?
Yeah, no, I mean, with the whole the whole court scene, one of the people that he calls to be his defense is actually an old friend, Roland Walter Dutton. And to add on to the trauma of the situation, not sure that's the right word, whenever he's pulled out and sat there, he's in a jester's costume, and
Yeah.
they've already gotten to him. He's not himself anymore. There's no mind there. And with him being sentenced to death and then chased by the villagers, it's all very oddly twisted. And I think that happened, that sticks out for most of the episode.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead and talk about the end here, because I love this scene too, because he's able to go back, and there's a machine that's acting as a communication relay between the village and
Used to be called a teletype back in the day. That's almost how you would get your
yes.
stock tickers and everything. Yeah. Almost like a pre-fax machine.
Yeah. That's communication between the man in charge, number one, it seems, and the village. And that's when number two comes into the back room, and he tries to damage the machine, but number two, because number six turns around, there's a one-way mirror, and it's looking out at the party, and the villagers are there. There's this one woman checking herself out of the mirror, checking her makeup, and the party's back on. And number two says that the village, they don't know that he's already dead, and that essentially his way of being is either going to be that of Dutton or nothing. And that's where it just kind of ends, as the teletype machine, as you said, resumes operating, continuing. And it seems like this is going to lead into something else, but we sadly know that it won't.
Yeah, and that's what kind of didn't make sense to me, because, number two supposedly defending him, Little Bo Peep, his observer, the hot blonde there, she generally seems distressed about the fact that this is going on. Everybody's chasing him. I thought, okay, obviously we're not going to have an episode halfway through where they're going to catch him and kill him from limb from limb. But he conveniently, when he was backtracking, when they were chasing him, he's in the room where he can't really go forward. So he pulls on a trap door that was so conveniently there. And I'm like, okay, cool. Catacombs, secret places. You know, my inner 12-year-old Indiana Jones fanboy is coming out at me because he finds the secluded room where it appears number two holds up in, or a room that number two decides to be into. And it's kind of splash because he's away from the crowd chasing him. And this is always cool stuff. He's going deep in the labyrinth of the heart and the brains of the operation, as it were. And I, the telex thing bugs me because earlier in his room where he was standing by the television set or the TV set that was on like a bookshelf. It was a small one, like a 12-inch, 13-inch black and white. We know that he was being spied on from there. I saw clearly put on there a poster of Seville, Spain that had bullfighting, and I saw it a second time, and I go, well, I'm wondering if any of these background props or decorations mean anything for this particular episode or not, or what. I don't, not going to try to accuse the show of being that clever, but with the telex, it's like, okay, we can't read what's being on there. This is very old school, but when number two shows up there, it's like, well, she knew where it was going to go. And yet I'm going, well, the hot blonde here, we're going to see her again. We've never seen another woman appear a second time. And again, she takes her cleavage and her puppies, whatever you want to call them, out there because it's so obvious that they're showing this episode. And they've never done that. They've left the women to be nothing more than people you can't trust. But yet here, Bo Peep goes out there and kind of takes care of the crowd, while number two is a woman here is like, having this nice little comeback. He says like, well, you're never going to win. And she's like, well, it's going to be very uncomfortable for your old chap. And then you're right, the episode ends. It's like, what the fuck? I mean, it didn't really come to anything. Yeah, he physically destroyed the telex. We see the old breadboards there with the wires and everything coming out. He destroys it, but it's still functioning. And I'm like, I guess I get it. I don't know, but it just, she's sitting there laughing, and that's it. And to me, it's just incomplete. I don't like the ending. I don't like what they did with it. I don't like how they tried sexing up some of the women in here. And by all means, I love having that. I love having a strong female role that we have, and we definitely get that in the number two. And I like the approach, but it's a weird episode because this whole vibe of what you get from it from the beginning, and the scenes on the beach, and his old buddy and the corpse, that all adds up to kind of real dreary stuff. And of course the cat that he was feeding, all that, we're assuming this is all the same black cat. We saw it in an earlier episode where he wakes up and the village is completely empty, and I thought that was really cool. It's just something about it. It's, of course, it's a black cat, but apparently the black cat had led number two to where he was at, and he's like, well, I should know, I shouldn't trust anyone, even the four-legged variety. And yeah, it's like, well, we know that already 8 episodes in, but if it was 2 episodes in or 3, or if they show this thing earlier, it would have made a hell of a lot more sense. So yeah, I'm not a fan of courtroom scenes ever in anything. I just can't stand them. um, I don't think they really do much as far as revealing character. I don't care for him, and I think you had to have something like this in the prisoner episode because it really is about what goes on and the rules that kind of define the boundaries of the village. It's not the physical ones where the rover can trace you down. It's not the paranoid elements like the old commander, I think in episode 1, that we saw him playing chess with. That basically alluded to, yeah, I've been here a long time. There's no way I'm leaving, so I'm trying to make the most of it. This old guy that he knows. The fact that in the last episode we actually saw him physically leave, go back. He had a different set of people that he worked with come to infiltrate the island. He ends up back on it. It's different than the other episode we saw where he left on his own back to his old boss, and yet somebody there's in on it and he's back. So we know they're in on it. His government, whatever that may be. So I don't know. To me, it kind of felt flat. I wish this was a bit more spy than that. It's not. Out of all the episodes so far, while I enjoyed a lot of aspects and especially the tone to it, I wish we'd see more of this tone in other episodes because I did not like the ending of this episode.
I mean, I kind of agree. At the same time, I do like the end of this episode if it actually led to somewhere, but it's not going to, and that's the bothersome part.
Yeah.
I did appreciate a lot about it. You could just in how different it was. And, I mean, it is what it is. There's not much that we can really hope to change from it. This is where we're going to be left off. In the next episode, it will be, pardon me, a new week where something new's going on. And we just can't help that. Overall, though, I enjoyed quite a bit of this episode. I'd like to see it go somewhere, but no, it's just not going to end up well for him. And that's all we have to go off of.
I will say this, halfway through season 1 of The Prisoner, as we're talking about it, the whole Extreme movie show font is called Albertus, and I got it because I always thought the Prisoner font was badass. So the font that you see here in the show is where I picked it up for this particular YouTube channel. You did not know that? I wanted to drop that on you while we're live.
Okay.
Well, there you go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to The Prisoner, Season 1, Episode 8, Dance of the Dead. We're going to be doing next week, Episode 9. Look forward to checking that out. Professor Pixel and I will be covering over it. We'll see if it continues to kind of change its tone, if it's pivoting right now, halfway through that. As we talked about in our earlier Twin Peaks podcast or streams about what's happening on in all the different seasons, we see there's certain points where we wonder, hey, is this a pivot? Is this where things are starting to kind of gather momentum and change direction? We shall see. All right. For Professor Pixel and everybody here involved at the Extreme Movie Show, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for getting the word out. As always, stay extreme. And Pixel, you know what we say at this point. Be seeing you.
Be seeing you.
Good night, everybody.